So who's more racist in Korea? Liberals or conservatives?
Welcome to the Seoulite
Podcast
coming
worldwide.
up exclusive. It's the Seoulite Sean.
Listener discretion is advised.
You're in Seoul.
So guys, first of all, many prayers and thoughts to all those people who are suffering from the anti-Asian American racism and attacks in the United States. And more power to all of the activists who are really trying to make a difference. I think it's good that people say that we need to be better, but I think we need to get beyond be better. You don't ask a burglar to be better when they're invading your house. And we shouldn't ask the same thing of racists. They should not only be better, they should not be murderers.
Absolutely diabolical behavior.
So let's turn now to talking about racism here in Korea. It's an interesting vantage point to be in where I feel like a victim of racism in the United States, mainly by white people, but it's equal opportunity. And then here in Korea, seeing myself as a defender of foreigners, including white people, in Korea against racism done by Koreans. So if you want to talk about being better, try being on both sides of this coin at once. Okay, so what's happening? Well, a suburb of Seoul has asked all foreigners to be mandatorily tested for COVID-19. And now, starting from today, the city of Seoul has asked all foreign workers to also be tested for COVID. Apparently there was an uptick in COVID cases at factories and places of work where a lot of people are crammed together in dormitories. And a lot of these situations are environments where migrant workers have come from other countries to work in Korea. So therefore, we should probably be testing people who are in crowded working conditions or living conditions like dormitories, right? No, that's not what the Korean government has decided to do. They think the solution is to test all foreigners, at least right now in Gyeonggi province and Seoul. So the government's saying we're doing this to protect the health of the entire population, and they're justifying it with a preemptive statement saying that it's not racist because we did the same thing when we had the church outbreak. No, you didn't. See, the church outbreak, if you did the same thing, you would suddenly test all Christians in Korea. And you just leave the Buddhists out. You'd leave the atheists out. You would only test Christians. But no, that's not what you did. You actually did something very good. You tested the people who were part of that particular church where the outbreak was, and then you tried to do contact tracing through the testing. So again, being on two sides of the same coin has really made me see what, in terms of just trying to talk to people who are not aware of racism, what works. You can't make a logical argument based on the situation at hand. It's really unproductive to tell a Korean person who is really for this mandatory testing measure how discriminatory it is. Because in their mind, it's not discriminatory and the whole public health is at stake, and basically they're just looking at it from their perspective. It's going to keep me safe, it's going to make me feel better, and then it gives me an excuse to say like, oh my god, coronavirus is, these other people's problems and they're bringing it in. So there's kind of like a sick, dysfunctional form of comfort for being racist. Whether it's racist in America, racist in Korea, racist everywhere, the people who can be convinced, so these are low-key racists, need to see themselves as the victim. So one example I would come up with is that let's say that there's suddenly an outbreak of coronavirus at hagwons for high school juniors who are cramming to prepare for their college entrance test. So the logical thing to do would probably be to test the people who are at that particular hagwon, and then even if you want to expand it out, test people who are in cramped hagwon spaces, these after-school centers. If you do it based on the way the Korean government has done it with foreigners, you'd go and test only high school juniors across the country, only Korean high school juniors. Any foreign students who are a high school junior would not be a part of this mandatory testing if we applied the same logic that the Korean government is applying for mandatory testing of foreign workers. Another argument that Korean racists are using to support this is just saying that it's not racist. We're doing this for the public good and it's not racist because we say so. That's very similar to when white people in America say like, oh, we're not racist. How? Because we're not. The Korean phrase that a lot of foreigners really have a problem with, sort of accept, sort of make fun of at the same time, is please be understanding, please understand our situation, or we ask for your cooperation and understanding. That's the translated version. The one that is Konglish is please understand our unique situations. So in Korean it's 이해해 주시기 바랍니다, or 우리의 사정을 이해해 주시기 바랍니다, or 양해를 부탁드립니다. And it sounds so polite. It sounds so neutral. But I would say if there was a perfect simultaneous translating machine that can get across the full meaning with the subtext, you would see very quickly that Korean people are the masters of shade. They are basically saying, we're not going to hear anything else from you, so you don't have to bother to even waste your breath with speaking up with the response. Thank you, bye, leave. Please understand our situation. All right, so let's go back to the question of who is more racist in Korea or xenophobic, liberals or conservatives. Just as in America, there's people on both sides who are racist and not racist. But actually the liberal side uses racism and xenophobia a little bit more than the conservatives when it comes to strict politics. Like I said, there are non-racists on both sides, there are racists on both sides. Once you understand the history, you'll see oh, that makes sense. Most people, I would think, and this is definitely what I thought when I came to Korea, oh, the liberal side would be less racist because it's just liberal. You have to think about it from a Korean perspective. And anytime there's actually racism, even as a victim of racism in the United States, it feels very heavy and it feels like I am the object of this hatred. Now seeing it among Korean people, the actual object of hatred in a racist situation is actually not the racism victim. It is their opposing opponent or their rival who are probably the same race. So in Korea, it's basically a battle between liberals and conservatives, and we're just, if you're caught in this kind of racist situation or xenophobic nationalist situation, you're just sort of cannon fodder for the bigger battle at hand. So now I understand over in America when you have all these white people who say they're not racist or they are sort of low-key racist, but then they're I don't have a racist bone in my body. And the only way I could really understand that as a legitimate response is that actually they're not thinking about race as the primary conflict. They're using race as just another tool, another convenient way to heighten their power or position. Today it might be race, tomorrow it might be sexism, the next day it might be, I don't know, what kind of job you have. So I could see how in their mind race was just one of the things, and it was just kind of something I picked up at the moment and I used it. Similar to kind of what I see in Korea when from this case, we can talk about conservative racists another day, but let's just talk about the liberal racists today. And they're using it because it is a direct hit, not against minorities in Korea per se. It is a hit against minorities, but their bigger goal is to hit the conservatives. Why? Because historically, conservatives have been aligned with the United States and also other foreign countries. If you look at it from a capitalistic perspective, the conservatives are usually capital, liberals are usually labor. So as capital, they also have to invest in other countries and they have to protect their capital, which means they have to have good relations with other nations so that, their overseas factories or investments don't get seized by another country. Therefore, you see in the conservative circle a lot more English education emphasis, studying abroad, and because they're capital, they might have more resources to do so. But the liberal side just sees the enemy as the other privileged Korean people. They're seeing that the education system has been hijacked where you have to learn a lot of English, and they might not have the resources to put all their kids in very expensive and arduous English education. Therefore, they start to resent that. They also see that they are being abused by the elite Koreans who also add to their power with their international ties and foreign connections. They start to see that this is an unfair system, and instead of being really able to target their main enemy, which is the conservatives, they'll go for easy wins like this to make them feel better in the short run by punching down at other vulnerable vulnerable members of society, including foreigners who have come to Korea. It's a very hypocritical situation to be in because the liberal camp is supposed to be more about human rights, and that's not the case in these types of situations. And that has gotten the foreign community to be really, really mad online. And I have to say, I totally agree that this kind of logic in terms of creating public policy that is based in probably vengeance or anger or literally xenophobia, it's not going to make the Korean government look good. So right now they're trying to do in 2 weeks testing of all foreigners in Seoul who have a job. And now this is the ironic thing. If you look at the language, it says workers. And workers mean regular workers, people who actually are under the labor law as a regular employee. They're trying to find like these laborers or even illegal immigrants, saying that, you won't be penalized if you get tested. But obviously they're not going to come and you can't track them. The only people you can really track are probably people who are office workers, they're not the target population of the people who are cramped in dormitories. So all of the embassy people, are they supposed to be tested? In 2 weeks, they're going to have like about 250,000 people be tested. I don't know if that's a very reasonable goal, and in terms of the resources. So I can see this really crashing and burning, and the government's not going to look good. The government's going to look like they really failed in this situation. They're also going to be accused of doing this on purpose to probably divert from some of the political scandals that have crept up. I don't know if I said this before, but it doesn't matter at some level what side you're on, because the common denominator with these horrible decisions are older, xenophobic Korean men. And there are enough of them in positions of power to create these public policies that really set Korea backwards. Is this forwards for you? No, backwards this way? I don't know, whatever way. And actually this is a good metaphor because they're always fighting with each other. So in Korea we call it kondae. Kondae, I think, is a derivative of condescending. But generally, it just means like an older person who loves to say, back in my day, this is the innocent version, back in my day, da 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 da. Or it could even be a younger person these days who has that kind of mentality. But that is a very sanitized and generous way of describing a conde. Really, what it comes down to, and it's aligned with racism, it's using the infrastructure of society to be able to have power over another person unfairly, power that you really didn't earn. So the biggest usage of that in Korea is age. Automatically, your age can trump somebody else based on a power position. In the United States, racism, no matter like if you're the lowest class white person, you pull out that white card, you could, send like a PhD black person to jail. I mean, that is essentially what it is. It's the systematized, unearned power that they want to preserve, and they're afraid of losing. And so I believe this gesture here in Korea is just like one of these last gasps for trying to hold on to that dying system, same way that they do in the United States, where they're even willing to invade their own capital to make a statement that they don't want white power to disappear. So there, in a nutshell, a very ridiculous measure reflecting the xenophobia and racism of Koreans. Not all Koreans, but enough to create a policy that affects over 250,000 people. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later, and hopefully this will be resolved and they'll backtrack on the policies. All right, guys, see you next time.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.